Hello. Today we're going to talk about, I'm going to move me over here. Today we're going to talk about your assignment from yesterday, and we're going to talk about the life cycle of viruses, which is also what this diagram is showing. That your assignment yesterday, just to recap, was to watch that dengue virus video, kind of see how the details of how dengue virus replicated, and then compare it to here, COVID-19, kind of looking how, using that video of dengue, because they have the same general steps as this diagram, and kind of using this diagram and the pictures of what's going on in it to figure out the steps of a virus replication cycle. And I know we don't know anything about this yet. So you were just kind of investigating based on the diagrams and the videos. And I wrote down a lot of your questions. You guys had a lot of great questions. And just so you know, I am going to focus on a specifically viral replication cycle. I'm not an immune system because that plays right into this also. I'm not going to focus on the disease, the progression of disease or transmission really, because that's not what we're talking about today. So I'm going to limit the questions that I'm answering to those specific types of questions. Okay, to start, so you guys watched a dengue virus video, and one of you guys asked, what's the dengue and COVID-19? I said they're similar, and I'll tell you, they're similar, but they're different. Each virus is different, obviously. Dengue infects, for example, dengue infects the immune cells, so they infect white blood cells, whereas coronavirus infects cilia cells in the lung. So that's what you're seeing here are cilia cells in the lung. And some of you are asked, what is cilia? How do they get there? Cilia are just parts of your own lung. So it's a part of your lung here. And I brought up a picture so you could kind of see this on the screen. You're sharing the screen with me. Focusing here. Promise I don't corona, I messed with the wrong direction. Okay, so the cilia are just part of they're a cell type in your lung. So they're the part that actually help the oxygen diffuse into your lung. So cilia cells are your own cells, and you can thank them for increasing oxygen absorption into your lung. It's these little hairy things right here, okay? The lungs have all kinds of different types of cells, and the cilia, these little hairy cells, are just one example of types of cells are found in these cilia. You also have cells that are found in each of these little layers. This is showing like what the inside layer of a lung looks like. And each of these this mucus cell, it says columnar epithelial cell. Each of these are different types of cells that make up the inside of your lungs. So that's what we're looking at. We're taking a snapshot inside. Say a virus particle gets in your throat, like we've talked about when we discussed in class the other day or last week or whenever that was. And then it travels down to your lung and it gets into these parts here. This is where these parts here are your bronchioles. They help with oxygen diffusion. And that's where a lot of this is going to take place. This part is going to take place on the inner layers of your lung. So that's where I want you to picture this being at. Because for COVID-19, that's what we call its target cell. That's a cell that it infects and replicates in. They can't infect any other types of cells. And we'll talk about why in a second. But first, let's look at the structure of it, and we'll compare it to dengue real quick. So from the video, you watched your dengue virus, and it had a protein membrane is what they called it. And it's similar to COVID-19. Here's just a real microscope picture of COVID-19. So first you have the inner parts of the virus here. And this is where the genome is, that RNA genome. This is a similarity to dengue. Dengue virus has, if you watch a video, it went very much detail. You don't need that much detail. But it went to a lot of detail about the genome of the virus and how it replicates itself. Well, coronavirus has the same type of genome. They both have positive RNA genomes. Remember, RNA is a type of nucleic acid, just like DNA. except it's single-stranded. So it's just a different type of nucleic acid. And actually, it's just like your mRNA. Okay, so you have a very similar structure of RNA in all of your cells, helping you to make proteins. So the same thing is in each of these coronaviruses, and same thing is in dengue virus. And then the next layer of what you have is you have a proteins on the outside of that called capsid proteins. Think of it as like a structural thing for the bones of a virus. They're not made of the same thing as bones, but they serve as, like bones serve for us. This is the structure of a virus. It gives it its nice shape. Then on the outside of that, we have membrane. The virus actually steals this lipid membrane from your own membrane. It actually steals it. And then on the outside of that, then you have proteins called glycoproteins. They are on the outside of the membrane, and they stick out of the capsid and the envelope. And basically, they are the antigens on the outside. They're like little projections on the outside of your virus. Okay, so that's a basic structure. And dengue has a very similar structure, and they have the same type of genome. But dengue virus and COVID-19 are very different in the fact that they infect different cells, and they cause different disease because they infect different cells. That's the main point here. Is one of the things, maybe not the main point, but that's one thing to take away from this, is a disease you get is very relevant to what the target cell is for that pathogen. So for COVID-19, it causes respiratory issues because the target cell of COVID-19 are these cilia cells in the inner lining of your lungs. For dengue virus, they cause a different disease because they're infecting different types of cells. Okay, so we're going to keep this in mind and move to this. So have this page out, and I'm going to walk through the steps on each of these for you. So you have your, I drew out steps for you on my written one. I have the steps drawn, but I'm just going to show you where the steps are on here. So here we have on this, what this cell is showing, and this is step 1. This is called attachment of the virus. So you can see the little viruses are attaching to the outside of your lung cell's membrane. Okay, so it's attaching to the outside, and some of you have asked, well, why is your cell letting them attach? Well, your cell needs things to attach on the outside of it. They need to take in food, for example. They need to take in all kinds of things from their environment in order to survive. They need to take in glucose so they can make energy. They need to take in proteins, amino acids from breaking down proteins. They need that stuff in order for the cells to survive. So they need to take in stuff, and that's why they let some stuff in. What viruses do is they kind of hijack that system. So if they have similar matching little Velcros on the outside, those proteins, if their proteins match the proteins on this cell, on the outside of the membrane, then that cell thinks it's just some kind of food that's coming in, and it lets it come in, and it brings it into that endosome that you saw in that video. So it engulfs it, brings it in, and then attempts to eat it, basically. But the viruses are hijacking the system. Okay, so your cell is not thinking that a virus is attacking it. Your cell is acting as if it is some type of food source, is something it needs for it to be able to live and maintain homeostasis. So once a virus is attached to those outer membranes, and remember this is only on the lung cell. For COVID-19, it'll only be on these lung cells. Then you move to the next step. Here, our next step, this is step number 2, looking at this cell. And in this one, you have the virus is injected into, it injects its genetic information into the cell. Okay, so the virus has already attached on the outside. That was step 1. Step 2, it's putting its genetic information into the cell. And similar, what you can't really see on this diagram is, that's why I showed you the video also, is that endosome, that big bubbles coming in and bringing it into the cell. And a lot of you have asked, in that endosome, why do they lower the pH? Well, remember, the endosome is your cell taking stuff in, okay? This time it's a virus on accident, but usually it's food. So your cell, normally when it takes an endosome, brings something in from the outside, it wants to chop it up and eat the stuff that's there, use it for cellular processes. So it needs to break that stuff down, okay? Well, that's why it's lowering the pH, is because you make it more acidic, because with a lower pH, it's more acidic. It's going to denature the proteins, okay? Denature the proteins, break some of that stuff up. But this isn't a protein or glucose or something that it needs to break down. This is a virus, and the virus knows that it's going to lower the pH. And remember, the viruses get this way based on natural selection. The ones who have gotten this far and have gotten past the endosome and infected the cell, those are the strains, the types of viruses that are alive and replicating today. So they have to go through a process of natural selection as well. Back to step 2, we've injected the genome into the cell here. The DNA, in this case, it's RNA for COVID-19. The genome, genetic information, is injected into the cell here. Then you go into step 3, okay? Step 3, you're kind of thinking like, what is that stuff? Well, this is a cell, and let's keep in mind, looking back at step 2, this right here is a nucleus, okay? This is the nucleus of the cell, and what you're seeing here is you're seeing that genetic information is now fully injected into the cell, and it's going in to that nucleus. And what's happening is, right here, step 3, which you have, is the cell is replicating the genome for the virus. Remember, your viruses hijack your own systems. Your cell thinks it's just replicating its own genetic information. But what's happening is it's replicating the virus's genetic information. It's hijacking your system, but your cell's just doing what it normally does, but it's the virus's stuff this time. It's not the cell's stuff. Okay, so now we've replicated the viral genome. Step 3, cell replicates the viral genome. Next step number 4. So here we're on step number 4, and you can see there's even more little specks. What's going on? So now this step 4 is, remember we have step 3, we have that new, that genetic information has been replicated, your cells replicated it for that virus. Now it's replicating the virus's proteins, okay? So it replicated the genetic information. From that genetic information, from the DNA, in this case RNA, but from the RNA, it's making proteins, just like your cell normally would. Remember, we talk about all the time how DNA, the point of DNA is to provide the information to make proteins. Well, this time you're making the virus proteins, okay? So instead of making the cell's own proteins, it's making viral proteins. So that's what all these specks are. All these little specks are these different proteins that are being made by your cell. It's hijacking your system and forcing your cell to make its own proteins. But your cell doesn't know the difference. It makes proteins out of RNA all the time, okay? So this is the virus hijacking your system. Step 4, cell makes proteins for the virus. This is the last step, step 5. Step 5, we have all these little baby coronaviruses now. So they look exactly the same as the ones that originally infected, but now you have a bunch more, okay? You started with one that attached at the beginning, but now we have a lot escaping, okay? So this is step 5. This is viral release. Now we have all these brand new replicated viruses, and they're being released from the cell. And there's 2 ways that this can happen. So for the dengue virus, you saw little viruses just kind of popping out. Well, they can just pop out and bud off and not really cause much other damage to the cell, or they can do what COVID-19 is doing, what it's being shown here. These viruses are building up to the point where there get to be so many of them that the cell just pops. Okay, that's what's happening here. This is that's called the lysogenic cycle. Don't worry so much about that, or the lytic cycle, because they're lysing the cell. They're breaking open the cell. So they grow, 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 and then pop, like a balloon that's overfilled. They pop it, and then there's thousands of virus particles, maybe even millions, depending on how small they are. But so many virus particles are released at the end, okay? Or you can have like dengue, where they're budding off as soon as they're done. They're just coming out and they're not really damaging the cells. So there's two different ways that viruses do that, depending on what their life cycle is, okay? So that was the steps of, that's the steps of a virus life cycle. One question you guys had was how long that takes. That's a really good question. And the answer is, we used to think it would take 6 hours, 4 to 6 hours. Well, they've done new research with pox viruses, which is like, think chicken pox, smallpox. There's a lot of different viruses that are like those, but those are a type of pox virus. Research with them shows that they can take up to just 1 to 2 hours for this whole thing to complete. 1 to 2 hours going from this original infection to all these baby viruses popping out, which is crazy. So it's happened so fast. And once you have all these guys building up and bursting out, you have an increase in what we call the viral load. So if you're reading articles, you might run across the term viral load. That just means how much of these little virus particles are in somebody's body. And this is how you get to have such an intense viral load. Now let's talk about defenses. Some of you guys ask, why don't our cells have defenses? They do have defenses. They absolutely do. But it's not the cell itself. Keep in mind, your bodies are made up of a lot of different types of cells, right? You're made up of a lot of different types of cells that work together. A lot of different types, okay? What is your defense system? It's the immune system. Your immune system is your defense system, okay? So the individual cells think that they're being hijacked. They think they're just doing their normal job, okay? They're taking in stuff from the environment like they normally would. It just happened to be a virus. They're making stuff, producing stuff like they normally would. It's just a virus. Your cell doesn't know, but it doesn't need to, because normally your immune system takes care of it. That's why you're healthy 99% of the time, 99.99% of the time. You're a completely healthy person because your immune system takes care of that for you. So your defense system is your immune system. And some of you have asked how that works. So how does your immune system actually like help against this? And that's a great question. It is a very complex question though, so I'm going to try to simplify it the best I can. And I'm just going to switch tabs here and move my face. Okay, so this is don't worry about the acronyms and everything. I'm going to walk you through the important parts of this diagram. It's more simple than it looks. So here we have in the middle a virus-infected cell. So this is a cell like we just saw, like your lung cell. It's infected with coronavirus. There's a lot of viruses building up. It's infected. Once a cell is infected, it releases these things. See these blue and red things? These are like little flags that your cell has. They're called these MHC molecules, and we actually already talked about them with the Tasmanian devils. So it's these little flags. They're like danger flags. They say, hey, help, I'm infected. I'm going to cause damage. Viruses are going to replicate in me. Help, destroy me. So they're like alerting your white blood cells. And all these other cells around this virus-infected cells are different types of white blood cells. Okay? And then you see these little Y-looking things. Those are antibodies. You've probably heard of antibodies before. The whole purpose of getting a vaccination is to make specific antibodies against your virus. So, for example, looking at, these are kind of 4 different situations, A, B, C, and D, in which your immune system can recognize this. I'm actually going to start with B and end with A, okay? So B, you have these antibodies that are specific for this specific virus strain, okay? And this purple thing is the virus. These antibodies can surround the virus completely, shutting it down from infecting any other type of cell. Okay, so they can actually just say, hey, we're going to trap you like a jail cell. Then it can't do anything. Okay, so that's one way your antibodies help you. That's B. C, you have this NC cell. It's called a natural killer cell. It alerts. It has an antibody attached to it that is specific to this this little flag, alerting flag. And these guys help to actually destroy the infected cell. And we'll look at the diagram that does that, that shows you that in a second. These two guys are cells that actually help. They contain antibodies that are specific, and they help secure the different viruses. So they kind of help trap those viruses so that they can't infect cells. And then you have your T cells, your CD8 T cells. These are the really cool guys. These are your natural killer, or not natural killer cells, sorry, that was this one. These are your killer T cells. That's what these guys are known as. You may have heard of these, of killer T cells. That's what CD8 plus T cell means, killer T cells. So I'm gonna switch to this diagram to kind of show you how that works. So first you have, this is an infected cell now, okay? Infected cell, they're displaying that MHC molecule, and on the outside of that MHC molecule, they display exactly what's infecting them. So it says here, this is the outside of the coronavirus, for example. This is what's infecting me, help, okay? So it actually takes that and displays that on the outside. And then these cytotoxic T cells, these killer T cells come up, and if they recognize and say, oh, okay, we're gonna start activating, okay? This is what's infecting you, so we're going to start activating this system, okay? Once it's activated, it's gonna say, okay, whoa, you're infected. The killer T cell's job is to kill infected cells, as their name implies. So once it says, oh, hey, you really are infected with this thing, then it's going to release these proteins that create pores on the outer side. These proteins are like bullets. They what's the word I'm looking for? They embed themselves in the membrane of the cell, and they create these pores, basically these holes. So think of it as a water balloon. Okay, if you're to poke enough little holes in that water balloon, it's going to blow up. Okay, and that's what's happening here, is they're blowing it up before the virus has a chance to replicate. Okay, and then the rest of, for any viruses that escape once the infected cell is killed, you have these guys, these antibodies, and these other white blood cells that are there to kind of trap and contain it. These are like the police force, okay? So if you have this guy, this killer T cells, killing all the infected cells before they can replicate and build up that viral load, and these guys get all the escapees, okay? Some of you also asked about, and this is a complicated topic too, but it's important to understand. You asked about how do you stop the glycoproteins from being made, or can you stop certain things from being made by the virus? And yes, they're called antiviral medications. And there are some of these antiviral medications out there. So HIV has one, for example, where it's not a vaccine, but instead it's a medicine that helps block the virus from doing one of its jobs. So here's an example, and this is like, whoa, a crazy, crazy diagram. This is just to show you all the different types of steps different types of viruses need to infect cells, and all these different types of antiviral drugs are inhibiting at these different levels. So some of them, if you look over here, some of them, if you look at retroviruses, which this is HIV, is a retrovirus, some of them are inhibiting the virus from getting in at all. So they're getting rid of the fusion inhibitor. Okay, so these are targeted responses that enable your cells to basically not let the virus in, or prevent it from replicating, or prevent it from building proteins, assembling itself correctly. There's a lot of different targets that drugs do take. They're called antiviral drugs, and they're very specific to that type of virus. They're very specific to that specific step that they're trying to inhibit. Okay, then we bring immunizations. Well, immunizations, that's what we're going to next, and that's your assignment today. Before I give you your assignment today, I want you to kind of understand how immunizations work, as well as I can tell you in the next 2 minutes. Immunizations basically activate this response, the immune cell response, quicker. Okay, so instead of having to wait for a virus infected cell and then have these guys have to be activated and the antibodies then have to be produced, what the vaccines do is they give you basically an inert, like a killed version of that virus that's not going to make you sick. And then your immune system starts to build these antibodies and these memory B cells, is what they're called. Memory B cells make these antibodies. So that if you are infected with it, a strain that can actually harm you, then you have all these memory B cells that are then churning out these antibodies right away, immediately upon infection, so you can arrest these escapees before they even infect cells. So you don't even have to go through this whole process. It just immediately takes the culprit and traps them right away. That's what vaccinations do. Immunizations, vaccinations, same thing. That's what they do, is they activate the immune system. And so today we're going to talk about coronavirus vaccination, and you're going to get this paper that I already printed for you. It's connected to an article. I'm attaching the article here. Here's what it looks like. Search speeds up for vaccine against new coronavirus. And honestly, this might even be a little out of date just because they're moving on this vaccination so quickly that this is a little bit behind that, but it's still very recent news. But what you're going to do is read the article and just answer these 5 questions today. That's your assignment today. All right, we'll be back tomorrow looking at more about immunizations. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye. Send me any questions you have.